Hello guys, this is Brian Wintz of UB Fit, and today we're going to be doing part 3 of how to deadlift. Today we're going to be going over some hip issues. First, to see if you have a hip issue is when you're deadlifting, sometimes you're not able to have the knees right above the ankles, and sometimes they want to kind of come forward. When you try to push them back, it may feel like you're about to fall back instead. So what that means is you have a lot of tightness in that posterior chain with the glutes and the hamstrings that are too tight to be able to stretch them out and lengthen them out. Now that you could have either one of two issues. You gotta have an anterior pelvic tilt or a posterior pelvic tilt. So an anterior pelvic tilt is when your anterior side of your hip tilts down. And then you create this huge arch in the back, and then your glutes and hamstrings lengthen out. A posterior pelvic tilt is the opposite. When your hip, the posterior side or the back side, tucks in and the front side comes up, and that's when your glutes and hamstrings then are being really shortened, and then the hip flexors are being lengthened. So the problem with both is then being able to identify which one is which, and both those are really exaggerations. Now, not everyone is at that extreme. Now, you can always try to go find the front of your hips, find the nice little that point, and then kind of have a headlight with it. And if you have even just a slight posterior pelvic tilt, instead of being like really exaggerated, it'll still kind of go up. And vice versa, if an anterior pelvic tilt, then even just a little bit will kind of point down. Instead of being exaggerating, you're going to really know. Now, another way to do that is either have a friend or family take a side picture of you in fitted clothing or even without a shirt to be able to see, hey, which one is which, right? And another reason as to why it's kind of hard to identify is the reason why it happened. And both happen because of a lot of sitting. Now, when you sit, a lot of times when people sit, they kind of slouch in. Now, the other problem is when you sit, your hip flexors are also shortened. And when you stand up, you might want to tilt down. So really, it's just going to be the path of least resistance, or what causes the issue first. And it's either going to be the tight hip flexors pointing down and pulling the hip down, or it's going to be the tight glutes and hamstrings that are then pointing and tilting down. So once you identify which one is which, then you're going to have different approaches. When you have a anterior pelvic tilt, the glutes and the hamstrings are already lengthened, so you don't want to actually stretch them out. They're going to feel tight, but you don't want to stretch them out, and that's because it's like having a rubber band. You already stretched the rubber band, you're going to stretch them again, you're going to cause more harm than good. Instead, you'd want to stretch the hip flexors. And vice versa, then with the posterior pelvic tilt, then you would actually want to stretch out the hamstrings and glutes because they're shortened. So we're going to go over some posterior pelvic tilt first. So this one first, we're going to go over some exercises, stretches to do to be able to help with that. And then we're going to go over the anterior pelvic tilt. So the first thing for the posterior pelvic tilt, when the glutes and hamstrings are shortened, is we want to help stretch them out, and we want to foam roll them. So foam rolling could be even just getting the foam roller and foam roll your hamstrings, foam roll your glutes, and then stretches could be stretches like the one we went over in part 2 for the calves. It's like the hamstring walks and the inchworms. We'll go over those as well as dynamic stretches prior to exercise to be able to help open those up, to be able to make sure that we have enough lengthening. Then what we could do is we could do an exercise to help strengthen as well as stretch out that posterior side. And the common one is an RDL, or a Romanian deadlift, or Russian deadlift, whatever you want to call them. And that is going to be on one leg, or if you're not steady enough yet, on 2 legs. So you can try 2 legs, and you just stand on 2 legs, keep those legs straight, keep the shoulder blades back, and then push your hips back going down. All right, and then you squeeze those glutes coming back up. And the other one would be a single leg, and then you're just on one leg, yet again squeezing the shoulder blades back, and then kicking that leg back, going down as best you can, and then squeeze that glute coming up. So that's a little bit of a progression into that. Now that's for the posterior and for the posterior pelvic tilt. For the anterior pelvic tilt, the hip flexors are what tight, and the glutes and the hamstrings are actually weakened. So what we want to do is we want to help open up those hip flexors. So we can foam roll them, foam roll the whole quads, since the rectus femoris is a quad muscle, but also a hip flexor muscle. We could also do something called a kind of like a Bulgarian lunge as a kind of a strengthening exercises to help stretch out those hip flexors while being able to work on the posterior glutes to help activate them. And what that is, you just put your foot up against a table or a bench, or if you have what we have over here is this special kind of like step that you place your foot on that kind of rolls and helps with a little more comfort. And then you just go down and do a lunge. And you do that on each side. Or what you can do glute bridges, or what I like to do is even a hip thrust holds. And that you just put your shoulder blades on a bench, and then you just squeeze your glutes and try to tuck your hip the opposite way. So if you have the anterior pelvic tilt, you tuck it in and try to activate those glutes as best you can. You just hold that top as a nice isometric contraction, and then you hold that for about 30 seconds to a minute, or as long as you can. And that will also work on being able to help activate those glutes and hamstrings, kind of going against where your pelvis is already at, so that you'll be able to push those hips back. The last thing is just some general mobilization for your hips. And you're gonna need a band, and you're gonna need something, one anchored a little low, so that when you're on your knee, it will be able to go over your hip. And what you're gonna do is, you're gonna be on one knee, and you're gonna be in this kind of lunge position. You're gonna place the band over on the hip with the knee down, so the side where the hips up, the knee's down. And then you're going to, yet again, kind of place yourself in a proper position. It's not too much of a posterior tilt, and not too much of an anterior tilt. You're just gonna lunge into it, and be able to then squeeze that glute, and make sure your hips are square, make sure the hips don't turn out. And then you're gonna be able to then pulsate with that, and try to, as you're breathing, try to go deeper into it, deeper into it. And then what you're gonna do is then you're gonna switch sides. You're gonna do the same side as well. Now the other one that you can do, and this is more so for both, but more so for especially that posterior pelvic tilt. You're gonna want then a band about hip length. You're gonna get into it, you're gonna place it around your hip, you're gonna step forward, and then you're going to kind of do a hinge, and that's what the deadlift is you're just gonna squeeze your shoulder blades, and you're gonna let the band kind of pull you back and be able to help stretch that out or lengthen that out, and then you're gonna squeeze your glutes. Now you can do this with anterior pelvic tilt as well, but you might just want to kind of do more so just hold at the top, be able to squeeze those glutes as best you can as that band's kind of pulling you back. That could be an alternative to a hip bridge if that bothers your back too much, or a hip thrust if that bothers your back too much. So hopefully that's able to help you guys out. Hopefully you'll be able to figure out with just a few tests to figure out if you have anterior pelvic tilt. Yet again, anterior pelvic tilt is when the front side tilts down, or posterior pelvic tilt in which the back or the posterior side then tucks down. Then you'll be able to have some exercises to be able to help correct those, and then you'll be able to deadlift without hopefully bothering your lower back. So this is Brian Wentz of UB Fit. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, be sure to leave that in the comment section down below. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day.